fairs, as a rule, are ephemeral. Will there be anything lasting at this one?
Oh, yes, indeed. In the first place, we'll have several new buildings, but over and above that, we're going to finish Flushing Meadow Park with the receipts of the fair. And when I say that, I think it'll be the finest park in the city of New York. It's right at the geographical and population center, and I think it will cost about $10 million to finish the park. The landscaping will be here, the trees will still be here. About half the utilities have been put in on a permanent basis, so they'll stay. And this will be a great park, the park.
Yeah, the yellow one goes broke too.
Do you have anything in here that needs to go? You took it in? Oh.
So this portion of the pavilion where that seam is, where the cinder block is, all the way over to that other seam over there, just past the door. This wall wasn't here. They put it up after the fair to secure the areas behind the wall. All these doors were added also. This was an open snack bar. They had tables set up just behind these planters. Planters, I guess, were also part of designating where the snack bar was. So we're just painting this first so it looks nice from the theater side. Back to scraping.
Yeah, we're gonna blow this out.
I mean, that yellow, at least it's clean compared to what it was on the outside.
Yeah.
By today,
Generally,
I don't see no problem going from this pipe all the way over to the other seam.
Yeah.
I mean, no problem.
Yeah.
All right, come on, let's do it and get back to it.
You go from the top of the door down, and I'll just pick a red section.
I feel raindrops.
Don't say that.
It's raining.
Yeah, there may be a little something there.
Save the rain, dropping it down.
So we need more paint.
We need a red for the other end.
I think when people drive by, they kind of think, man, what is that building? You know, what do they do in there?
The building has been weirdly off everybody's radar now for a number of years. I mean, it's there, and everybody sees it when they drive past it to the airport. But people don't think about it in the same way that they think about a lot of other buildings that represent preservation challenges.
It's a great big minimalist sculpture out there with the towers. The towers are incredible.
Of course, with Men in Black, everybody, started knowing as the Men in Black towers.
It's just those towers from Men in Black that become spaceships at the end and explode, and that's how most people know it.
It is one of the most unusual structures you ever see. Like, it still looks modern today.
It's part of the landscape. It's part of the landmarks that you see when you fly into LaGuardia Airport. A lot of times people don't know what it is. They notice that on the plane. I'll go, oh, there's, the New York State Pavilion. And people go, is that what that is?
Of course, on takeoff and landing, I always like to take a look out. Can I see it? Yeah, this gate's right there. So.
A lot of people don't know the history of it, and they've never seen pictures even of the glorified New York State Pavilion. They've always seen this building that looks rusted out.
I think it's maybe better today than it was when it was embedded in the fair itself.
World's Fair buildings are not designed to be permanent. They're meant to be taken down again. But somehow there's always something that turns up at a World's Fair that nobody wants to tear down because it turned out so superbly. And in this case, the New York State Pavilion was one.
Well, I think in order to understand the story of the New York State Pavilion, you really need to understand how Robert Moses viewed this entire park and this fair.
He was involved in the 1939 fair, 1940, and he built the basic park.
Well, Flushing Meadows, from the time that the borough was first settled, was always a very vast, unpopulated terrain. Nothing was really ever settled in the territory itself, and that's how it was up until the beginning of the 1939 World's Fair. The only industry that took place in the meadows was, of course, the famous ash dumps, which was controlled by the Brooklyn Ash Removal Company.
Garbage was collected from Brooklyn by a special train by a very shady character named Fish Hooks McCarthy. And so basically the garbage, the waste of Brooklyn, got dumped in Queens.
The Great Gatsby, which is written by F. Scott Fitzgerald, he wrote about it. And he named it the Valley of Ashes, where ashes grow like grotesque gardens into ridges and hills. And he describes it very beautifully. Robert Moses and his political machine basically forced the Brooklyn Ash Removal Company out.
The truth is, Moses had been dying to make Flushing Meadow Park into an even grander park that, in his mind, was going to surpass Central Park.
You know, a lot has been said about Robert Moses over the years. He was certainly called the master builder and probably the king of New York City. And, you know, that's all justified.
I mean, his success establishing the 1939 World's Fair in Flushing Meadows really set the precedence for everything that he did after.
But there was no money after the first fair to then turn it into this park that was going to blow the doors off, Central Park. So when the second World's Fair came along, the idea for it, I mean, he just seized the day.
It's very uncommon for them to do two World's Fairs in like the same exact location with just a short time span.
The 1964 World's Fair, I think, stands out as one of the most important, significant cultural moments of that generation.
It was better than Disneyland.
Space exploration, undersea adventures, I mean, it was all there. It was my future that I was looking into. It was kind of like looking to a crystal ball.
Cars with computers in them and everything.
You get to ride in the car and see the future, what the world was going to look like.
The technology of the fair was like a wow factor to me.
It was very, very dynamic and very, very promising.
And they always tried to show the newest thing, products that came out, some of the corporations, Kodak.
All the ones that had rides, like Bell Telephone, and the car manufacturers, Ford, GM.
General Motors and Chrysler.
They introduced the Ford Mustang at the World's Fair, and you could sit in a Mustang and ride through the Ford Pavilion.
Mobile phones that we're using on the video phones. And for years after that, I remember, when is that going to happen? That should happen, you know?
I was also just real impressed by the monorail systems.
The Pepsi-Cola It's a Small World, which of course is still at all of the Disney theme parks.
Imagine an entire space like Flushing Meadows Corona Park. We're talking exhibits from corporations, different states, countries, just all trying to promote themselves. So it's a lot of commercialization, but also trying to inspire people. There's a lot of invention, discovery that goes on at World's Fairs.
In a way, it was like a theme park before there was really a theme park.
It was really a positive kind of fun, look what the world is, you know?
The vision for the future the fair had. It's kind of interesting to see some of the things the fair got right and some of them they were very, very wrong on, but I try to remember the right ones.
But on the other hand, I don't think the World's Fair, New York Fair in 64, 65, was ever an official fair.
It wasn't, technically speaking, of an official World's Fair. That has to do with the BIE. The BIE is the Bureau International Exhibition, which is the French name. This is a Bureaus of International Exhibitions.
It was not a normal World's Fair, and that it ran for 2 years. It ran for 64 and 65.
That violated one of the basic rules of the BIE. The rules were only one country could hold a fair every 10 years. The land had to be given for free, and it can only be 1 6-month period. The 64-65 fair violated all three. Now the truth is, the 1940 fair also violated all three, but they worked around it. Moses wasn't a diplomat, so this fair was really kind of like the first post-colonial World's Fair. And because of Moses and the way he handled the BIE, Western Europe sat out, but the rest of the world, all those former colonies of Italy, of England, of France, they all came. It just must have been mind-blowing to be a kid wandering around Flushing Meadow Park and seeing, Africans from Africa, or Indians from India, or Arabs from Saudi Arabia, or Mexicans from Mexico. So you could literally sit by the fountain of the Unisphere and just watch the world go by.
Everybody seemed proud of where they were from and what they were showing off. And that was great.
The fair itself at night was it was great. The fountains, like the fountains of the planet, and they were just lit up and just really spectacular.
I can still see them being lit up. There'd be little lights coming on here and there as you go by.
I remember looking at those elevators and looking at the monorail in the distance and thinking, this future is kind of almost here. Like a lot of kids that grew up in the 1960s and visiting the fair, we really expected that future to come true.
Did you play with the echo? About 6 maybe?
Maybe, right?
Maybe 6.
This was a fairly new innovation when they built these columns. It's called the slip form method. And actually, if you could look up, you could see the lines. They poured section by section, day by day. And you could see where they stopped pouring the concrete and started. You could see the different colorings. These forms were poured in the coldest parts of the late 62 into early 63. It was just like brutally cold, but yet they kept pouring, putting antifreeze into the concrete, and they covered everything with burlap, so to cure very slow. Beautiful work of construction here.
This whole area is dropping. We spackled it up to make it look better, but basically this whole area here sunk about 6 inches or more because the footings in this area sag. And if you look up that way, you'll see the mezzanine split, causing, due to the sagging of this portion of the wall.
These were all flower boxes during the fair. All the way down all the walls. All beautiful fresh flowers and everything. Remnants of what was.
The critics who trashed the architecture of the 64-65 fair, they just didn't get it the way we do today, because we live in an era where we accept this kind of what kids call today a mashup of architectural styles and periods in time.
Whatever you can say about the 1964 World's Fair, it was not an architectural triumph. There were just a handful of buildings that were of real note architecturally, and this was one of them.
Nelson Rockefeller, the governor then of New York State, wanted the building to be as magnificent as we see it. He wanted it to be the biggest building, the tallest building, to show the strength of New York State.
Nelson Rockefeller wanted a building that was state of the art, that would reflect the sophistication of New York State. And I think Philip Johnson gave him that.
Well, Philip Johnson is one of the most interesting figures in American architecture in the last century. He did an enormous amount to bring architecture into public view and make it a subject of public discussion and interest. He was sort of became known as the dean of American architects. He encouraged the careers of many, many important architects who had really been mentored by him in some ways.
Philip Johnson was, in the 1930s, the promoter of modernism and the international style especially.
In 1930, he was given the position of the first director of architecture and design at the Museum of Modern Art. The World's Fair was a very important thing because it presented New York to the world at large.
You go to any World's Fair, it's always attracting a world's class of architects.
As a kid growing up in that environment, we thought all buildings were going to look just like the New York State Pavilion.
It really was a vibrant, colorful building that was illuminated day and night. Ida Louise Huxtable said, called it a sophisticated frivolity, and that it was a carnival with class.
This sort of thing that was like a huge tent, a concrete and glass tent. What an amazing, weird concept that was.
I mean, the roof was just spectacular, the multicolored panels, and then the towers way up above you, your eye was drawn to it.
Introducing the color and materials, I think, was the dynamic expression.
The roof was made of fiberglass, and fiberglass seemed to be the material of the fair. When the sun shone through it, it was like a sort of space-age rose window hovering above, or a circus tent hovering above your head.
The light coming through the tent was fabulous. And it was, nobody had seen a building quite like that.
When you went in there, it looked like it was like a light panel above your head. It was just kind of glowing, and it actually looked nicer to me at night than it did during the day, because the colors were now being punched through by bright lights coming through. You couldn't see at night so much the towers that were holding it up, so you just kind of saw this giant glowing disc hovering above your head. It was kind of a neat impact.
Didn't have any rides, so that wasn't thrilling, but if you were going to go in a building that was sort of interactive with you.
But when you walked through into the center, there was just stuff spread out all across the place. There was a stage where there was always something going on.
Entertainment would be your sort of Macy's Day Parade kind of entertainment.
From classical performers to rock bands, I mean, you just name it. It was just every kind of entertainment.
They invited every single performing group across the entire state to come down there. I mean, if you had a garage band, you want to play at the fair? Come on, we got you at 2 o'clock next Thursday. They gave you a slot. Your high school marching band could come down.
What the Tent of Tomorrow offered was you could do your own thing. You could walk in and walk out. 1 minute you could see Hudson River School paintings from the 19th century, and then the next minute there'd be a twist contest. So it was this really interesting mixture of high culture and popular culture, and Philip Johnson mixed it up.
There were stores there where people could buy souvenirs and other objects. But then the mezzanine itself, well, you got another great view. It started there. It was almost like there were all these levels that you kept getting a better view of the fair and Queens.
There's some beautiful photographs by Ezra Stoller, color photographs of that second level and looking down. He was Philip Johnson's favorite architectural photographer. And Philip Johnson said he didn't consider a building complete until it had been Stollerized.
I can remember that thing off kind of in the corner of the fair, and it sort of pulled you there because it was one of the very few really strong pieces of architecture at the fair. It was a building that used advanced engineering combined with a very exquisite sense of architectural composition to make something that was both aesthetically and structurally quite beautiful and fully resolved.
again, designed to be a pavilion because it didn't have to house any kind of really traditional architectural function. It was there as a celebration.
It has the monumentality of the Roman Colosseum, but its form feels very, very modern, space age.
First times that I walked in there, I thought I was walking into the Colosseum, and I was gonna fight a couple of lions. You know, so that was my feeling. You know, and other times I also felt that I was looking for a bullfight. You know what I'm saying?
The roof is very special. It's called a bicycle wheel roof because it resembles a bicycle wheel with the spokes.
I mean, it's almost like taking a stained glass window that was in a church and hanging it horizontally.
Lev Zetlin was the engineer, and the 250 by 350 foot elliptical Tent of Tomorrow, for instance, was a cable-supported structure. And in order to support that, there's a ring of 100-foot high reinforced concrete columns. If you look at those columns, they appear to be monolithic. The roof was created on the ground and then jacked up simultaneously, which is not an easy thing to do because it couldn't shift or else there'd be a disaster. So simultaneously jacked up 100 feet to its location. It just is sort of an amazing engineering feat. The towers themselves were created the same way with that slip form method.
It was really any computer, and most engineers work within those restraints pretty much by the book. You know, there was already stress factors and this and slenderness ratio. So when it came to something more creative, more dramatic, Lev was at that time one of the leading players in that field.
It was a very new innovation at the time to create a large span roof over an open arena or area. So it was the first of its kind, and also I believe the largest bicycle wheel roof at the time.
There was also those sky streak elevators that would take people up between the levels, because these like glass encased futuristic kind of elevators.
As you went up, you could see everything the whole way. It was a clear bubble that you could see out.
The towers were the tallest at the fair. 226 was the maximum height. The top two were observation, and the bottom one was used as a kind of VIP lounge.
Truly spectacular view of not only the fairgrounds, but all of New York.
It was a fun building. I mean, it was fun to go up on those observation towers and elevators.
When you look and you see just this long cylinder column and this big dish sitting on top, you're thinking, I wonder how they did that.
What you get in effect is a 360-degree panorama with very little structure. So that solved an architectural problem. In the Theaterama building, the third component of the New York State Pavilion, which showed a 360-degree Cinerama movie about the state, on the exterior, on the blank exterior, he chose several pop artists.
Contemporary artists had designed pieces that were attached to the building, like Robert Indiana did one of his big Eat signs.
And it was the first time outside of a gallery that the larger public saw pop art. 50 million visitors visited the World's Fair over its 2 seasons and saw Andy Warhol and Ellsworth Kelly and so many others for the first time.
Johnson had a lot of fun with the theater because he had the Andy Warhol 10 Most Wanted or something like that.
Basically 13 of the most wanted criminals in New York City, in New York State. You know, they look like criminals. They're all mugshots. It's all mugshots. You know, looking straight onto the camera, some looking to the side. Some of them are repeated, you know, in different patterns, except for 3. 3 of the panels were left blank, as in the idea being that there were more wanted men out there.
Robert Moses found it offensive. It wasn't the tone that he wanted for the fair, and the governor didn't like it, supposedly, because all the names were Italian Americans, and he was afraid of offending the considerable Italian American population of New York State.
First they painted it over, then they took it down, and then they covered it, then they took it down, and they never replaced it. The fair is one big advertisement for corporations, for rides, for companies, for countries. New York State Pavilion is a pavilion that's one large advertisement for New York State.
There was on the floor a huge, giant road map of New York State made by Texaco, the gas station company. And it was very popular during the fair because people would like to walk onto that road map and actually point out the city that they were from.
And you walked across it, you felt like Gulliver marching across the land.
You would always just see all these crowds of people with their little Kodak Instamatics and all, and they're saying, oh, there's Long Island City, or, there's Poughkeepsie, or there's Albany, and it was a great attraction for them to do that.
It was just unbelievable. All the detail that went into that, the little route signs and the cities where the intersections were, where the freeways came together. It was amazing.
Everybody that walked in there that had any connection to New York State would go and try and find where they live.
Another kind of pop art thing, which takes things and changes their context. So now a road map is something that you could walk across. And kids loved it, but so did adults. I mean, how far is it to walk from New York to Buffalo, along the New York State Thruway? You could actually do that.
I'm Jerry Lazaro. Worked for Port Morris, my family business, for 45 years before I retired. I was sort of a gopher at the time, I guess, because I was a young fellow just starting out. I'd only been working here a couple of years. And the way the whole thing came about was my uncle, who was pretty familiar with and friendly with Philip Johnson, because we've done a lot of work for them before. Philip Johnson had asked him, what do you think something like that would cost? And my uncle said, $1 million, off the top of his head. I don't remember how much it all came to, but it probably was close. Terrazzo is marble chips and mixed with cement. The terrazzo that was done at the World's Fair was actually done on marine plywood. Wire mesh was adhered to it, and then a mortar bed was put on with the terrazzo topping, which was with the aggregate and the chips. So it turned out it was about 2 inches thick. And these panels were 4 feet by 4 feet. They were pretty heavy. All the divider strips, which made the map itself, was done up in Connecticut, and they did all the layout and from a Texaco map. They actually blew up the map, and I understand a lot of the students from Yale University helped out laying this thing out. We'd receive the panels. They'd come down from Connecticut, and we'd put them up on benches, and all the different colors were put in by hand with a trowel, and then nowadays we use epoxy for most of the terrazzo. We'd finish them, polish them, and put sealer on them, and then they were brought to the job, and they were set on the job in a very light mortar setting bed just to seat them. A funny thing happened, though, is after the thing went in, millions of people were walking on it, and they come to see where their little town was, and some of them weren't on the map. And then we'd hear all kinds of noise from these people, and some town official would get on the horn, and before you know it, we'd be out there with hammer and chisel, opening up a space and putting in a new town. And originally, these panels were supposed to have been taken up at the end of the fair and brought up and installed in a building in Albany somewhere, which would have been really nice because we'd still have them intact at this point. But unfortunately, they were left on the site and turned into a roller skating rink. And unfortunately, I don't think there's anything that can be done to save most of it. Most of it's completely deteriorated. It was a work of art, really, when you think about it. It was pop art before its time. I never thought about that before, but it was.
The pavilion had, in the columns, up the towers, there were these blue globes. And over the years, vandals, I guess weather, pieces would break, they'd fall down. They're all within the dirt around the pavilion. These are some of the fragments. This is not an original one. I think there was an art installation at one time, many years ago. This is a thick frosted blue. But all these lighter color blue, very translucent pieces, are leftover fragments of all the globes that were here. You can see the curvature to it. So some stay clean, some are pretty badly weathered. But these are the type of things that only history nerds and World's Fair geeks like us would totally appreciate.
Rockefeller, he said that, who knows, in years to come, the New York State Pavilion might be like the Eiffel Tower of New York. But Moses loved it. It was one of the very few pavilions that from the get-go he had marked as something he wanted to save. When he turned over the Flushing Meadow Park in June '67, it was shiny and new, completely manicured. The pavilion was operational. Everything was great. The Science Museum, the zoo, the fountains were working. That's June '67. That's only 18 months after the fair ended. But man, it must have seemed like October '65 must have seemed like a much, much different place than June 1967.
The historian Arthur Schlesinger said that those years, '64, '65, the United States was on a pivot. We were moving from a period of relative consensus to a period of conflict.
And so by the time you get to the '70s in New York City, there's just pure urban decay. And that's where the New York State Pavilion, I think, becomes a symbol of this former grandeur.
It was pretty intact into the mid-'70s. I can remember it.
But there was never the funding to really maintain it. There was just a lack of imagination. They just said, oh, we'll have some concession in there or something.
It was sometimes a concert space where you'd had some pretty big name bands would go in there and perform. Grateful Dead, Led Zeppelin, other really huge acts being at the New York State Pavilion, which now seems impossible.
In the 70s, it became a roller skating rink because the floor was still beautiful. Also, 1977, Michael Jackson and Diana Ross, they actually shoot some of the film for the Wiz. Towards the end of the 70s, it's when actually something happened there. I don't know exactly what happened, but it was left alone.
I'm Christine Jellin was my prior name. Last name now is Rafalki. We're originally from Cleveland, yeah. In 1970, the only place that there was work in the entire country, my husband was an electrician, was on the World Trade Center. He worked in the elevator shafts, putting up the elevators in all those buildings. It was our idea to put the roller skating rink in, actually my husband's, back in 1970. We were competitive skaters at the time, so we drove out to Long Island just about almost every day and passed the New York State Pavilion and Flushing Meadow Park, and one time we stopped. We were looking around the building, and so one time we went around walking on the floor, and that's when he discovered, it's Terrazzo. There's a, map of New York State on it. And he kept saying, why, was this left vacant like this? Because it was starting at that point to deteriorate a little bit. Little chips were missing out of it. And my husband said, this is all clear span. It's Terrazzo. Terrazzo makes a wonderful skating floor. Why don't you find out who owns the building and let's see if we could put a roller skating rink in here. It took about a good 6 or 8 months for us to get permission to do anything with the building. The city said that they, didn't have money to do any funding like that. So we actually put the roller skating rink in as far as the rails and the plastic coating and fixing the terrazzo and making it all smooth and everything. We did that all with our own money. And we opened on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th, 1972. We had a 3-year concession agreement and we operated for three years. The roller skating rink, we called it Roller Round. Then after a while, it got the nickname the New York Skate Pavilion. So that was kind of fun. We didn't really have a business plan. We weren't business people. We just always thought if everybody who lived in New York, in Manhattan particularly, would come and visit us just once, our admission was $1, 50 cents for skate rental. And if everybody just came once, then we'd be millionaires. I know when we had skating sessions there and you had the music and the lights and it was just magical. Just the crowds that were there, the atmosphere. The people, you hear the music and the happiness in the air. One time, shortly after we got it going, there was a beautiful night. I decided to go outside the skating rink. It was probably about 10 o'clock at night. And I just went outside and around the building, and it was all lit up. And the music, and you could hear the people laughing, and I thought, we did it. You know, that was kind of a neat feeling. When we would be at the building, a lot of kids would stop and say, you know, what's going on? Because they weren't used to seeing people there. Charlie Abar was one of them.
I remember on a rainy day coming up to the pavilion, the door was open. I remember coming out and speaking with Bob, and I said, what are you doing here? He says, well, we're going to make this into a roller rink. And I'm like, wow.
He was just one of the kids that wanted to help, and he was one of the most sincere, hard worker. You could depend on him. And the other kids a lot of time would say, you know, all right, we'll be there, we'll do that, and then they wouldn't show up or they'd come late. But Charlie was always there, right on time.
I was thankful that Bob allowed me to work there as a teenager. The first job was cleaning hundreds of those blue globes.
He was one of our lead people there. He was an excellent skate guard. The kids liked him, so he kept everything under control.
For me, I was a figure skater on ice. I switched over to roller skating because I found out all the girls were going to be there. And being in high school, hey, what guy didn't want to work at the roller rink and have the opportunities on Friday and Saturday night to be kind of like in the mix with all the groupies and all the girls? You never had to worry about a date.
Charles Abar is a man I'd like to have known when I was younger. The thoughts of the things he did back at the pavilion, I mean, the pictures of him walking across the roof of Tomorrow changing light bulbs on it, it brings vertigo to me looking at him today. But to think that he had total reign of that pavilion, and he could just go anywhere he wanted to, up the tower, down the tower, in the basement, over here, back there, things that, you know, I could just go and look at from the outsider and go, gee, I wonder if there's anything left inside the theater. He had the keys to the building. I have to live vicariously through Charles' life stories, and his pictures still scare the crap out of me.
I didn't go out on the roof. The other kids would climb out on the roof. You could hang onto the cables and walk. I didn't go that far. I just went to the edge and saw the top of it, and it's like, okay, and went back down. But the guys were braver than I was. You know, they worked on the roof trying to stabilize it so that the panels wouldn't be flapping around.
The roof was literally falling apart. Bob and one of his partners devised a way of strapping down those roof panels. And we did it to not all the panels, but a lot of them that were flapping in the breeze. And when my mom found out what I was doing, she was ready to kill me. I was only a teen then. I was looking to make a couple bucks, but I just thought it was a fun thing and very challenging. There were times where I walked on that roof, believe it or not, and literally stepped down and the panel would just disappear underneath our feet. Could have been us. Ironically, when the concessionaire came in and said we're going to make this a roller rink, suddenly everyone perked up and said, no, we don't want roller skating there because the floor is going to be damaged. They
said we were going to ruin the floor. But basically what we did is Bob tried to match the color. He got some kind of like a terrazzo repair mix. It wasn't concrete, it was for terrazzo. Then he had a terrazzo, like a big, like a grinding machine that would grind it smooth and polish it. And then after that, it took 2 or 3 coats of clear varathane to put on so that it would make a smooth, you know, roller skating surface. So the people were actually skating on the plastic coating, not on the terrazzo directly. And every so often we had to reapply it. I want to say maybe every 3 months. Through 1974, we were getting pressure from a lot of community groups a lot of like the Parks Department people that the roof was unsafe and we'd have to stop, having a skating rink there because we were endangering all the people that were there. So
I think what happened is a piece of the channeling came down onto the Grand Central Parkway and hit a car, and someone complained to the city. The city came on in and told the concessionaires they had to replace the roof, otherwise they weren't going to be the concessionaires anymore.
So after that, then one of the building's inspectors came. He just came, walked onto the floor like he owned the building, which infuriated my husband because it was right in the middle of an afternoon session. So my husband escorted him out the door. Next day we had the roller rink closed signs up when we went there. So that was essentially the end. I stayed in New York. My husband, we needed money to eat. So he went back to being an electrician. And he worked on the power plant then in Hibbing, Minnesota. And I stayed in New York with the baby, trying to get the roller skating rink reopened. At that time, I know the city was going through some hard times and they were trying to avoid going into default. So that was our thinking of why they didn't renew any of the concessionaire agreements. It was kind of like the people who had a job were very concerned that they might lose their job. So they did nothing. That's why I stuck around for a year, because I had that hope that maybe we could, get things settled and open up again. But that, didn't happen.
When was money finally invested in Flushing Meadows? And I don't think it was like to the late 80s. No one was going to invest money into it.
The 70s were a very, very difficult decade for New York. I think people just got distracted. There were other things that had priority. The idea of doing something with this building was a luxury that nobody could afford. I mean, we need schools, we need housing, we need hospitals. This cannot be a school, it cannot be housing, it cannot be a hospital. It can't be anything that we need.
I think everybody got paranoid about liability insurance from people getting into the structure somehow and being hurt by falling debris or something. And the city actually went forward and knocked out the glass ceiling.
And when you remove a roof from a building, you do a lot of damage. Why no one could see this coming, I have no idea.
In destroying the roof in a very heavy-handed way, they just hammered out the pieces and let them drop. Those falling pieces ruined the terrazzo floor and opened that up to the elements because they knocked out huge chunks of it. And so then there was soil underneath and stuff started growing up through it.
So the $11.5 million that was spent building that building and putting a permanent foundation to make sure it was permanent began to be compromised.
It was bad. And it was a shame because all of us who love the city hated to see it in that condition.
Most of the fair pavilions had special permits. They were built basically for 2 years. And then things that wanted to be kept needed to be, touched up in a way. I don't know if the State Pavilion had been touched up. It was from the get-go on everyone's list to keep.
If you go and you look into some of the speeches Nelson Rockefeller gave at the time, he sure didn't give the impression it was going to be temporary.
Some of the records that we have here with the architectural drawings are not accurate to what was built. We know that wood piles were used.
There was also some steel added, but for the most part, they're wooden pilings. They're not on any of the plans, and that was just hearsay from the engineer. Now the towers were always on steel pilings because they were so tall. They didn't deal with wood pilings, so there isn't as much of an issue there.
There was a very elaborate substructure design that would keep the piles wet at all time, because what rots wood is that it wets, it dries, it wets, it dries. This system was designed to keep the pilings wet all the time.
When engineers had investigated, they found that the water table was actually low and they were untreated and partially rotted.
It was left to rot. In New York City, it was left to rot. And by the 70s, that park was rotted and that structure had begun its long, self-destruction.
I went back there, I think in about late 70s, early 80s, and I was in New York for a business trip, and I had a day with nothing to do, and I said, I haven't gone out to see the World's Fair site in a while. Took the number 7 train out, walked out there, and the pavilion was open. I walked in, and it was so bizarre. The ceiling was gone by that point in time, and there was nothing going on. It was just empty, and I was me. I was the only one in the entire building. And it was just weird to walk around, climb up the wreck of the escalator that's there, and you couldn't get into the tower, but you could walk around anywhere else. And it was just so silent. It was like something out of a ghost movie, a ghost town movie with wind blowing, and you expected to see the tumbleweeds come rolling through. It was a strange feeling to know how many people had been there and look around and see that you're all by yourself.
I grew up in Forest Hills, which is not far away from Flushing Meadows, and my parents would often drive to my grandma's house in Flushing, so we would always pass by the New York State Pavilion. Looking out the back window of the Toyota Camry, I would always wonder, what was that building? Because you could tell that it must have at once been a fantastic building, and people really put a lot of effort into creating it, so it had some special importance, and that's what built that curiosity up. There was this gadfly known as David Oates.
David Oates was a passionate protector of the building.
For years and years and years, it was a labor of love that he had of keeping an eye after the park.
And he had been to the fair as a kid. He knew Robert Moses personally.
If you go online and just look at the pavilion and the history of the pavilion, you'll see a lot about David Oates and his determined efforts to try to get somebody to wake up about it.
Often he would be putting together some attack on the city bureaucracy or railing about some injustice.
One time he called the Daily News and he was really upset that the observation light had been out. So he was arguing that it was a safety hazard. He had been calling the FAA. He had been calling the New York City Parks Department. He hadn't been able to get any sort of response from them about getting that observation light back up. The staircase that's inside the tower is apparently so rotted away, the Parks Department had to pay these guys to walk up the side of the tower to replace a light bulb.
I think from the day he walked out, where some of us moved on to other walks of life, he stayed with the park pretty much since 65 on.
I just wanted to keep putting the spotlight on it because I felt that was one of the problems with the coverage of the New York State Pavilion. It was that every 3 or 4 years it'd get a big write-up in the New York Times and all the preservationists would get giddy that, did you see the front page of the New York Times? It has the pavilion, and that's great. But there just wasn't that kind of continuous coverage that puts pressure on officials to do things. And that's what I wanted to do. By those articles being written, all these readers of the Daily News are starting to get interested. And they understand the importance of the buildings. And, there's this whole community online of people who remember the World's Fair, who are historians, authors, just people who went and are nostalgic.
Well, Bill Young set up his site, nywf64.com, and I had heard somebody mention it to me before it went online, and he had a page, and it said something about your ticket to the World's Fair experience begins on so-and-such date. So I sent him an email and said, I happen to know a little bit about the World's Fair, and if there's anything I can do to help you about your website, I'd be glad to do it. So I spent time with him going through the various pages and, correcting some typos or some, fact-checking things along that line, and then started helping to contribute photos. Bill's done an excellent job on his site, and I'm glad to have helped him with a number of his photo articles over the years.
The University of Pennsylvania started a project where they were going to conserve that giant road map from Texaco on the floor of the Tent of Tomorrow.
I believe it was called On the Map. So Frank Mateo grew up in New York and had gone to the fair and had nostalgic memories of this structure. And later on in life, found himself in historic preservation.
He had student projects up there where they actually came up and began to uncover the terrazzo floor, which had been grown over with weeds.
Essentially, the work that Frank Matero was doing with the conservation lab at Penn, they were showcasing some of the panels that they had removed, and they had one panel which had not been touched, and then the work that they had done, the sort of before and after of what's possible in conserving the terrazzo.
To help conserve that very important piece of history, we removed 3 of them, and they're stored somewhere else in the park to protect them. And then the rest of the map has been covered with a fabric, a protective fabric, and then gravel on top of that. And all of this was under the guidance of the University of Pennsylvania.
My name is Willie Mosquera. I am the house manager here and also director of programming for a Latino Cultural Festival that we do here at Queens Theater in Flushing Meadow Park. All right, the funny thing is, the World's Fair for me, I mean, obviously I was a little kid and I wasn't here because I was born in Ecuador. I came here in 1965, but only for a vacation. But I didn't make it to the World's Fair. I made it to Coney Island. You know what I'm saying? But the World's Fair actually, I came to live the World's Fair like 22 years ago only, because I got myself a job here at Queens Theater, and little by little, in all these years, I've been learning what the World's Fair was. And so in the pavilion, I would always make sure that it was nice and clean. We would take care of it. About 18, 19 years ago, the pavilion would just sit in there. It was open to the public. You would go in there. If you wanted to play ball in there, you could play ball. And the theater was going to go under a major renovation. So we didn't really want to shut down. We wanted to have a place where we could still continue to present shows. We went and looked for some sponsorship money, and we got like $50,000 so we could actually give the pavilion a cosmetic touch-up. And I took over that operation. We were getting help from an agency here in the city that actually helps kids stay off from the streets and helps them go to school. So they would come and help us out, with the paint job. And the painting was a long process because that was like almost a whole summer. And we took all the measurements of the red and white stripes from the postcard because they're not all the same. There's 3 different measurements, which right now I can't remember by inches, what the measurement is. When we as a theater took over, then we realized that, all the effort that we were putting into like fixing the place, we needed to actually close it and allow the public to come in, but when we were there, you know what I'm saying? And my wish was always to make that building alive again. And we're still keeping our fingers crossed, see what happens.
Essentially, the Queens Theater in the Park is really thriving and doing well, and even had an addition constructed, a glass atrium addition. And the Tent of Tomorrow and the towers are sort of just rotting right behind it, next to it.
It's so hard sometimes to think of how to reuse a building. There was a really nice idea, which I don't know why nothing happened to it, but it was a great idea, by a firm, an architecture firm from New York called Create. And they came up with an idea to sort of repurpose it into an air and space exhibition hall.
Frankie is another individual that's put a lot of time and effort trying to save that building and gotten nothing but ridicule for it, trying to, convince people that this thing was an architectural wonder. He put an awful lot of time and effort into doing just some incredibly great drawings of what the building could be, for blue skying it. And then, unfortunately, the city just walked away from it.
I can remember taking trips into the city and passing it all the time on the Grand Central LIE, sitting in the back of Dad's Oldsmobile, wondering what it was. And my parents, who had been to the fair and could remember it very fondly, explained it's the World's Fair grounds. And so you hear fair, you think, well, let's go. What's with this fair? Amusement park? No, it's not a fair anymore. Fast forward to about 2000, had a meeting on Long Island on a weekend. I just needed some time to sort of veg out before I went back home. So I pulled off on the parkway and said, I'm going to go take a look at it. And I had never, ever been, all these years I had never been to Flushing Meadows Park. start walking around the Unisphere, and then stroll over to the New York State Pavilion, and could not believe the state it was in. So I start searching on the internet late at night. What's with the pavilion? How can I help? Who can I reach out to? An architectural firm here in the city. This is crazy. We connected with Bill Young, who runs an amazing website for the World's Fair.
So it was through Bill Young's effort in being in contact with Frankie that eventually we met. And we conversed quite a bit, and then we actually physically met at his office at the top of the Chrysler building, and we thought we had something that was valuable to all New Yorkers.
So he, through the internet, makes this connection, and eventually we get a client out of it, which was Charles Abar, who had this vision. He didn't draw, he wasn't an architect, and so he had this idea that the New York State Pavilion should be something else. And he's got this idea to turn the pavilion into an air and space museum.
We felt that an aviation museum would be the appropriate fit, because we could hang up airplanes from the ceiling, have the whole building enclosed, and have a connection from one of the towers leading into the building via a ramp, a glass ramp. Unfortunately, the city of New York and its bureaucracy and its fathers felt that, yeah, we need to do something with the building, we need to save it, we think it's worth saving, but we're not too sure if another museum would be good for the park.
You'd have these meetings, and they'd say, interesting, nice, great, where's the money? And then you'd break off after the formal meeting, and then you'd have these sidebar meetings where they'd say, this is the best plan we've seen in 40 years, keep going. We just left the table that you sort of cut us off. Frankie, keep going, just keep pushing, don't worry, keep pushing, we're telling you, keep pushing. And so you get a lot of missed signals, and this occurred for numerous years. We had amazing PowerPoint presentations. Mr. Johnson was kind enough, I think at the time he quoted himself, he had a quote in the New York Times, blessing the concept to save the pavilion. He didn't like it in ruins. We met with some great parks people. I remember one coming to our office here saying, I expected you to be older. And I said, well, is that good or bad? And she said, no, that's good, because this is going to take a while. I had no idea we'd still be talking about it 10 years later, and a while hasn't happened.
But you see, the developers are not interested, because until they see that they're going to get returns on their investment, they're going to stay clear. I'm sure the parks would love it. I mean, if somebody came and put the money in and they did it, that would be a feather in their cap. But they haven't got the money, and there's nobody come to the table.
Turning it into something does cost money. So therein lies the problem. So unless somebody steps up with that funding, we're always in that situation of what could it be, how can it generate revenue for the Parks Department, and who's going to undertake the project.
The pavilion came up more than once. He really liked it. But Philip was a funny kind of a realist, and I guess at that point when I knew him, he was pretty old. He was in his 80s, and he realized, I think, that sometimes things just don't go on forever, and he never sounded particularly crushed or insulted to me that the building had been abandoned. In fact, he sort of liked the way it looked as a ruin, and he thought people should recognize that ruins can have beauty and an aesthetic of their own.
I don't think he would have wanted it permanently to stay in a state of ruin, but it was like him, it was in the nature of the way he saw things, to be able to look at it when it was in a deteriorated state, to say, you know, it kind of looks pretty cool just like that, actually. As a ruin, it made people think, oh my God, what untold wonders and glories might have been there, like ancient Rome or something like that, even though, in fact, when it was operating at full tilt in the 1964 World's Fair, it wasn't really all that great. I mean, the greatness was really in the container, not what it contained. And he knew that, too.
Started back in 2009, November 2009. John Piero and myself. Well, John really had the idea to possibly put some stripes on the building, try to show a little dignity to this place. He approached Estelle Cooper, who was the Associate Parks Commissioner for Flushing Meadows at the time.
I was in her office one day and I just told her, "This is Estelle." I says, "I have this dream that I want to bring back to New York State Pavilion." So she goes, "Well, think about it, but yeah, all right, you could do it."
Sort of gave him the semi-okay. She was going to look into it. Sounds like a good idea. And John sort of took it as, we're going to put some stripes on the building.
So one day I come down here with a bucket of paint, Mitch and I.
On the far side facing the parkway, we painted a few stripes.
And then the Daily News came down, and I called up Estelle. I said, "Estelle, I'm finally painting."
She sort of threw a little bit of a fit that we put paint on the building, and he said, "Oh, we'll take it off if you want, but go take a look at it. Looks really nice."
So she came by, she saw it, she loved it.
It was history from there. The two of us showed up the next season and did several days of just the two of us, and then we developed a core group of 4 or 5 people, and whenever we had free time, we were able to get some paint, most of it donated. We just came by and just worked our way outside the building.
Everybody now stops and says, "What is this building?" Before it was just, a disaster, I could say. Everybody says, "Oh, when are you going to tear it down?" Now people are coming by every day, taking pictures, asking questions. "Oh, it looks beautiful with the stripes," and they want to know what it was all about. Now it's taking on its own legs.
But we're hoping to make our goal and get the paint finished by the end of this season, so it's ready for the 50th anniversary next year.
Seeing what this used to look like in comparison to the way that it looks now, it's just so striking. I think that before the paint job, coming in here, it would have been difficult to envision it repurposed, but simply a coat of paint has made such a tremendous difference in here that it's awesome now. Like, you walk in and you're just awestruck by the potential. The paint job really does make a tremendous difference as far as walking in and having that impact.
Tommy! Come on, let's get that wood up, man.
I'm here, no worries.
Let's do it. So we're looking forward to the 22nd, open gate. Will be a fantastic day. People will be in here photographing for the first time in decades. It's going to be some event. Finishing doing all the red and white stripes, getting that all together. Now we're going to be putting up the signs that were there during the fair, cleaning. Just pan around. It's beautiful. We're just about finished. Just a little more touch-ups, and that's it. We're done for now. This is the day. This is the day that's been 4 years in the making, as they say. And it has come to what we started. Look at this, it's absolutely beautiful. We have the original World's Fair flag going. The excitement is here. It's like the first day of the fair. This is just like the first day, 50 years ago, and it's amazing. The energy is here, and the rebirth of the pavilion basically starts today. This is it.
It's a long time ago. My memories are a little foggy, actually. This brings back memories. You know, my friends and I saw Led Zeppelin here August 29th, 1970. And it's quite a show. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. It was 1969. Did I say 70? For some reason, I keep remembering 1970. It was 69, that's right.
Well, I want to thank everyone for coming out today. This is just a wonderful day.
today we're celebrating something that, in a way, is even more of a triumph than getting this pavilion built, which is the steps that are being taken now toward preserving it. That's why it's a special pleasure to be able to announce now that the National Trust for Historic Preservation has named the New York State Pavilion a national treasure, which is the special designation the Trust gives to structures that are critical to our architectural, social, political, and cultural history, the kind of buildings we could not imagine being without. The New York State Pavilion was the finest architectural achievement of the 1964 World's Fair. But preserving it is about something much more than saving a memory from half a century ago. It's also an exhilarating public building. It stands as a reminder that not all of the civic architecture we made in the 1960s was harsh and cold. Some of it was lovable and wonderful. And now the Tent of Tomorrow, as it was called, has the potential to be a new civic symbol for the resurgent Queens, as well as a vital public building within one of the city's greatest parks. For a long time, the future of this building was a question mark. But in time, it will not be a question mark at all. I think it will be a different piece of punctuation. It will be a great exclamation point in the middle of a resurgent Queens. Thank you.
I'm very impressed by the amount of people here. In my wildest dreams, I did not think it would be this number of people. And the fact that they're all lined up on the footbridge all the way back to Corona, I would not have bet that. Not in the least. No, not in the least. I mean, it really goes to show you how many people really care about this.
Unbelievable. You know, I couldn't remember so much, but when I walked in and I saw the mezzanine area, then I actually saw the Stairway to Heaven. I mean, the stage was definitely off to the left. Led Zeppelin was set up on the left. My friends and I were standing right near where it says mezzanine, above that area, looking straight down at Led Zeppelin. And they played just about they played the whole first album, and their second album was just coming out then. So they were introducing a lot of the music from the second album. But I distinctly remember so much more now after going inside, because it hit the triggers, and it was great. I mean, I feel so good now. You know, it's brought back great memories, but it was great. It really was cool.
No one had an idea. The Parks Department, certainly not us. We're now, from what I understand, Tom of our team has handed out tickets. They're numbered tickets. They started at 1. He's at 1,700. And there's still a line over the Grand Central. It just blows me away. At times I'm choked up. Just that here you are thinking, maybe I'm the only one that cares about this place, but clearly we're not.
Finally, it's a very public building. It has so many uses. I mean, you could imagine concerts and dances, performances under the tent.
I would just like to see it being used for something instead of sitting there decaying.
It's a great, great, great facility waiting to be used and waiting to be renovated for future generations.
New York State Pavilion is almost like it's like a folly. That is, it's like this playful structure, only it is built to scale and you can use it.
I can imagine the future of the New York State Pavilion as being something that at this moment we can't imagine. I mean, that's in a way the most exciting thing, is that this could be a great place for something that doesn't even exist yet, that some brilliant young designer will conceive of and a new function will emerge.
I think the building's original design, designed to be a flexible space, lends itself to all sorts of possibilities.
At this point, for 50 years, it could have been torn down, and it hasn't. And I think it is as much a symbol of Queens as the Unisphere itself.
It is iconic that people drive by and see it and say, what is it? I mean, how much better an advertisement could you have for something to draw people to?
There's a reason why it's still standing there. So something has to be done. People have to understand the building. See, like I understand the building because I've been part of the building, you know. But when you actually drive by, you go like, wow, look at that building. It looks, you know, and that's about it, you know. And the building keeps on growing in you also.
A whole generation that's grown up around Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, on all four sides, that don't know a World's Fair existed. It's beyond their grasp. That has grown up with this building there, doing nothing.
But year and year would go by and it still stood there.
It's a very unusual building. It was for its time. It still strikes you as unusual.
So what do we do with it that makes sense, that honors its architecture and gives it an ongoing purpose? It's a challenge. It's a challenge that it's time now for us to start facing after 50 years. Ultimately, if it's not going to be just a ruin, we've got to now think of what phase 2 for this building ought to be. You know, who knows? I mean, in this digital age, public space is shifting and changing in its form and purpose continually. And here is an incredible stage on which all kinds of things might happen.
So.
Did I hit all the points? Hit all the marks?
Yeah.
You think I missed anything? Or
I think you did hit the points.
all right, good.
You did hit